Bloomburrow is the next upcoming set from Magic the Gathering, and previews are in full force and looking absolutely stunning. The main archetypes for the 10 two-color pairs have been fully revealed, and the way that they're supporting these archetypes has already been pretty well established. In addition to the two-color pairs, there have been a lot of cards that lie between them to support multiple, which makes sense. You need options that can go into either archetype. What makes an archetype strong is where the types overlap for this exact purpose, but it also shows us what might become strong three-color combos, despite the set being focused on just pairs. Let's start with blue-white. This is the bird faction, and one of the main reasons the three colors are so enticing. The primary bird mechanic is giving other creatures flying. When all of your creatures fly, this mechanic is not useful, which encourages you to splash into another archetype. Now maybe that's just the mice from white or just the otters from blue, but you could also lean heavily into one specific two-color pair, go three colors, and also get the benefit of that color's archetype. Mice, I think, have the most obvious synergy point. The mice are white-red, and their theme is being targeted. They have a new mechanic called Valiant, which whenever they become targeted for the first time in a turn by either a spell or an ability, they get some various bonus. This means that if you target them with one of your give another creature flying effects, they're going to get flying and some other effect, which makes them seem like a really good complement to your suite of birds. Mice, however, have other crossover homes. They would, of course, love to be targeted by the spell-slinging blue-red otters. That's the theme for otters. They like to sling spells, they have prowess built in for a lot of them, and anytime you cast a non-creature spell, something cool is going to happen when you're playing otters. This doesn't inherently synergize with Valiant, but you can see how it often would. In addition to liking when you cast spells, some of the otters actually care about when you cast multiple spells in a turn. Prowess, of course, loves this anyway. This actually lines them up really well for the new raccoons. Raccoons are red-green, and they have a new mechanic called Expend. Expend is just a trigger that whenever you spend a certain amount of mana in a turn on spells, you get an effect. You don't get it multiple instances, it's the first time you hit a threshold of mana spent on spells. And this means that to get this effect, you have to be casting spells. You can't rely on the activated abilities that some of the other creature types like. But the blue-red otters want you casting spells too, so it lines up really well. Now, of course, Expend doesn't care if you spend it on multiple spells or all on one. So while the red side of Raccoons wants you to team up with otters and cast multiple spells in a turn, the green side wants you to really cast one big spell that costs 4 or more. This lines up very well with rabbits. Now, rabbits aren't really the go tall faction, so that might surprise you to hear, but they're the go wide faction with big spells that make lots of bodies. It's still one big spell, so it works. Whether that's one big sorcery that makes a ton of tokens, or the new Offspring mechanic. Offspring is a mechanic that we're seeing across all colors, but it is predominantly the rabbit faction's ability. Rabbits are green-white, and they care about going as wide as possible, making tokens. Offspring is a new type of kicker on creatures that says if you pay the kicker, you get a token 1/1 copy of the original creature. This gives you extra ETBs, this gives you extra instances of static abilities, and of course, it just gives you a token. But between all of that, it's kicker. You are spending the mana to cast a spell. This is not an activated ability, which means it does work for Expend. The other place that Rabbit's go-wide strategy is going to work really well is with frogs. Frogs are our blue-green faction, and they care about enter the battlefield effects and triggering them over and over again. Whether that is blinking, bouncing them out of the battlefield and back in, or bouncing them to your hand so that you can then recast them. The jumpy nature of frogs and rabbits going well together makes a lot of sense. We've seen a lot of rabbits have really big enter the battlefield effects, making tokens, but maybe their body's not that big a deal. Bounce it back to hand, cast it again, make more tokens. Or if you have these bounce to hand effects and you really wish you had a blink, well, Offspring benefits you there, because you don't get the Offspring bonus a second time if you blink a rabbit, but you do if you recast it. Maybe you even had to tempo it out earlier, and now mid-game you can bounce it to hand for extra value. Circling back to otters real quick, it's worth pointing out that they have a really good interaction with rats as well. Rats are our blue-black faction, and they care about putting things into your graveyard and triggering Threshold. Threshold is a mechanic that says, get some bonus if your graveyard has 7 or more cards in it. An absolutely classic mechanic that has been brought in again and again in different forms, but this is classic Threshold. Unlike something like Descend from Lost Caverns of Ixalan that cares only about permanence, Threshold just cares about cards, and so it works really well with our spell-slinging otters, casting instant after instant and just filling the bin from playing stuff. Oftentimes we think we have to mill ourselves or have creatures die to satisfy Threshold, but absolutely not when you're teamed up with a spellslinger. On the other hand, of otters helping rats, we have squirrels maybe taking advantage of the rats. Squirrels are our black-green faction, and their mechanic is Forage. It's a new mechanic that lets you make a choice between sacrificing a food token or exiling cards from your graveyard. Bundling these two costs into a keyword allows you to have an activated ability or an end of battlefield effect that gives you a choice of costs, which is normally not something you can actually do in an activated ability. I know I recently tried making a custom card and found out no precedent for or in an activated ability's cost. But by using Forage, we can have that choice and give ourselves a lot of flexibility with our cards. In this case, if we have our squirrels team up with rats, rats can help us fill the graveyard, and then squirrels can forage what's in the trash. Now this might turn off Threshold, so there might be a lot of tension between your rats and squirrels, but that back and forth nature should probably make for some really interesting gameplay, if nothing else. Looking into what other black faction might appreciate some squirrels, we have bats. Bats are our black-white faction, and they care about either sacrificing your own life or gaining life to trigger various abilities, but only on your turn. Being a type that has an alternate use for food, you can bet that squirrels have the means to make more themselves. I'm not sure if I've ever actually used food for its printed effect, but it's always worth remembering you can sacrifice food to gain life. That's kind of the point, even though I feel like more often it's just about being an artifact with the food type, because a lot of things care about giving alternate uses to your food, as opposed to really caring about the effect of the food itself. It is kind of an expensive way of gaining life, but it is there, and it is a nice mana sink, and if you have some bats that care about gaining life, it would be really handy to have the option if you run dry of your other more efficient options. Of course, bats care about gaining and losing life, and so I think a good combination for the life loss half would be the black-red lizards. Lizards just care about dealing damage. They want your opponent to have lost life on a turn, either before you attack or to cast something in your second main phase, whatever it happens to be. But this does mean that a lot of their effects are kind of universal burn. They want your opponent to take damage, but they're not shy from dealing damage to every player. And as such, they're pretty decent at activating your bat's abilities as well. These, of course, are not the only overlapping combinations of different creature types in the set, but I think they're pretty good examples of how 3 colors could do very well in this set. What I'm really curious about is if there is a best 3-color pair that combines 3 different archetypes. I think blue-red-white might work really well. White-red mice can be the centerpiece, with the blue-white birds giving them flying, and the blue-red otters just occasionally spell-slinging an extra buff their way. There's not any inherent connection between birds and otters, but otters do have prowess, and if they get big enough, having some flying from a bird could really let you get in some huge damage, so that might be something that's worth thinking about. Other than that, I'm sure there's plenty of interesting overlaps to explore, and I'm personally extremely excited for this set. Oftentimes when a set has these really clear archetypes, the sets feel kind of paint by numbers. You don't really get that full deck building creativity where you find some interesting interaction. But because of the overlaps, I think there's a lot of potential to make decks with multiple types in really interesting ways. Do you make a triangle of 3 creature types that have different overlapping colors? Or do you find 3 or 4 even creature types that share the same color and go all in on that one? Because most cards aren't multicolor, you could even just use all of the black rats and all of the black lizards and all of the black bats and ignore the other colors entirely and go a really cool, really powerful mono deck. It's really exciting, and I, for one, am just thrilled that this set is coming to Magic, and not only does the theme look adorable, the cards look really cool. Anyway, I don't think I have any other point to make. The set looks great. Have a good night, everybody. I've been Darcy Bits, and I'll see you next time. I hope I can do like some post-processing on this, because this looks bad.